There's no due process. Basically they listen to my ex's story, they listen to my story, and then they just go, you're telling the truth.
We'll call this man Dan. He says his daughter was alienated from him after a Child Protective Services report substantiated sexual abuse. That means CPS investigated and found that an incident of abuse is believed to have occurred.
The DA declined to press charges, so that was cleared.
She wouldn't look or talk to me.
What do you think? Why do you think that was?
Oh, she was coached. She was definitely coached. Because my daughter was never like that.
I mean, there's no charges. Everything's been dropped. It's just that lingering substantiated with CPS.
Parents across the country are increasingly mobilizing to demand systemic changes, alleging corruption and incompetence are to blame for their loss of custody. They say the lack of transparency and oversight allows for mistakes in CPS and in family court. We can't tell what really happened in his case, but the judge used a CPS report as evidence and still allowed supervised visits. But what about the opposite scenario? What if a judge disbelieves an allegation of child abuse that was true? The Center for Disease Control reports that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused as minors, but 40% of sexually abused children don't even show symptoms.
When there's a suspicion or an allegation of sexual or physical abuse to a child, children are often referred to CPS. Then CPS sends children to a medical examiner. Today we're here at Sutter Health to meet with Dr. Vickers, who's a medical examiner who sees children to determine or at least give an opinion of whether or not abuse happened.
The medical exam is not going to answer that question. If I see something, I'll tell you. But if it's a normal exam, it doesn't mean that nothing happened. And the best way to determine whether something happened or not is to let the child make the disclosure.
She says it takes a lot for a child to disclose. If they're not believed, or if there are negative consequences to the disclosure, like if they're threatened or fear a parent might be arrested, then they may change their story, and that could impact their credibility.
I entered the family court system when I was 4 years old after disclosing to my mother that my father was abusing me. Instead of protecting me, our judge, who has been voted out of office twice and falsely claimed that she was a psychologist, sentenced me to 8 more years of molestation, physical and mental abuse, and hell. For 8 years, every single member of the family court system that my mother, her attorneys, and experts pleaded to save me accused her of alienating me and telling me what to say.
Judges don't make these calls alone. They're sometimes guided by the testimony of behavioral experts who strike the disclosures as false or the result of children being coached to lie by a resentful parent. In some of the cases we evaluated, the therapist was paid for by the party accused of the abuse.
So are you saying there are some therapists or some experts who have a reputation among lawyers to win custody for abusers?
Recommend custody to abusers, but they don't think of it that way.
People get their continuing education credits by attending presentations that have not been vetted on the merits. They become known, and therein lies their opportunity to serve as an expert witness.
We found a therapist to say that our daughter had a false memory of abuse, despite me having the medical records to show that she had the fractured elbow. When our daughter talked to the therapist and let them know what was happening, they said, no, this is mother coaching you to say the abuse.
There are a bunch of, what would I say, sycophantic experts who will make up words, labels for the women, such as alienator, gatekeeper.
Parental alienation syndrome had already been blasted pretty thoroughly.
Carol Brooke is a law professor at UC Davis who has challenged the concept of parental alienation in her writing.
Well, in fact, I think sometimes they call it emotional abuse. They say that there's brainwashing, and they will call that emotional abuse. So there is the disbelief of actual abuse, whether it is psychological or physical or sexual.
But online, the literature and the lists of experts are endless. I wanted to meet an expert in parental alienation. Dr. Lynn Steinberg, a psychologist in LA who specializes in parental alienation and sexual abuse, reached out to us to talk about it.
Nightmare. I've never experienced anything as painful and nightmarish in my whole life.
She says she understands the issue of parental alienation because she herself is a so-called erased parent. So how does she tell between true and false allegations?
the abused child would maintain a relationship with the parent who had abused them, and in fact wanted to see them and wanted to go back to them.
This
And
is like always or almost
yes,
always?
probably 90% part. They always want to go back to the abusive parent.
Abused children?
Yes.
Even if they're sexually abused, physically
Yes.
abused, emotionally abused?
Even in those situations.
So how do you distinguish between abuse and alienation?
Well, an alienated child, it's 100% that the alienated parent or the target parent is bad and the other parent is good.
When they disclose abuse, when they say, you know, somebody touched me inappropriately or did this or hit me or whatever.
Yeah, well, those are the cases that I specialize in working with, is where there's sexual abuse. And really, you can investigate it all the way down to what the truth is. Like, for example, this father was being accused of sexually molesting and assaulting his daughter. And I knew that he had diabetes and he couldn't get an erection. And nor would he ever want to do that to his daughter.
Wait, how do you know that he couldn't get an erection?
He told me, and that is one of the diabetic symptoms.
Diabetic people can't get erections?
Well, if it's severe, yeah, they can't.
I asked doctors if having diabetes or telling your therapist that you have diabetes should disqualify someone from being a child molester. They said no. Not all people with diabetes suffer from erectile dysfunction, and ED does not prevent someone from sexually abusing a child. Experts aren't only testifying in court, they also offer treatments that can cost tens of thousands of dollars to reunify children with a so-called alienated parent, sometimes an alleged abuser. Popular among experts of this treatment is to remove the accusing parent who they have labeled an alienator.
But that's a dangerous call to make.
Yes.
It's a very dangerous call to make. Because if you get it wrong, a child might end up in the custody of an abuser.
Well, the Department of Social Services gets it wrong all the time.
All the time.
They are not trained. You know, someone like me who's gone through 12 years post-high school of training, and you specialize in that area, it's a much more simple proposition.
And what does it take to have some kind of certification to be an expert in parental alienation?
There is none.
Dr. Craig Childress is working on that.
Dr. Childress was recently removed from speaking at the Association of Family and Conciliation Court conferences at the request of the American Psychological Association, according to emails obtained by ABC 10. The initial complaints to the APA against his and his partner Dorsey Pruder's presentation reads, "Acceptance of the Childress and Pruder presentation by AFCC was beneficial to these people's commercial interests and their ongoing involvement as expert witnesses in child custody cases. But in our opinion, the presentation was not beneficial for education of psychologists or other professionals." The complaint also points out that Dorsey Pruder is not a psychologist but a life coach and has a high school education.
She's got a lot of background in this. Just because she doesn't have a college degree doesn't mean she doesn't know what she's doing. She absolutely does.
So you're saying that what you were presenting or what she was presenting at the AFCC was in fact evidence-based?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, we're nothing really out there at this point is evidence-based. That the pilot program in Houston will be evidence-based. That's where we're moving.
Have you already trained people on ABPA, or is this something that's already making its way?
Yeah, I started training last year.
There are countless experts charging tens of thousands of dollars to treat children who reject a parent, therapies that remove the wanted parent and force the child, often ordered by a judge, with the so-called unwanted or targeted parent that the child is rejecting.
Yes, they're trying to brainwash children into believing that they were not physically or sexually harmed. ABA, the AMA, every credible legal and medical organization in the country has said alienation is junk science, it shouldn't be allowed in a court of law, and yet that bogus theory is what is responsible for the vast majority of children that we know are getting forced into these abusive homes.
The medical community rejects parental alienation syndrome, and studies show children very rarely make false abuse allegations. Just 4% of all allegations of abuse made by a child around a divorce are false. But in a system that leans towards disbelief, you can see the potential danger.
For more stories like this one, remember to subscribe to our channel. And if you have comments, stories you'd like to share, or ideas for what I should be covering next, please do so in the comments section below.